I don't see. Okay, so now you're talking badly about America. How dare you do that? I think it's a great country.
No, I said ask Gen Z.
Well, would Gen Z rather live in America or Somalia?
I'm just saying the American dream is harder to realize. The value of the dollar has gone down so much.
I know.
They don't see the ability to ever own a home, possibly.
Right.
It's a much bigger hill to climb than it was for all of us.
And that's your right to say. As an American.
No one's saying it's not. You're trying to turn this into a argument that doesn't exist.
I'm not trying to turn it into a argument. It is a argument.
No, it isn't.
You're basically saying if you're from Somalia, you can't spell what's wrong with America.
But I didn't say you can't. Strawman didn't come to the show, Joe. Strawman. No, I didn't say that either.
Okay.
You're just like having a fight with your wife, which I don't even have.
So picture the scene. Bill Maher is doing exactly what Bill Maher has always done. Pushing buttons, testing limits, stepping right up to the edge of polite conversation. He pokes the bear, then looks surprised when someone lunges at him. Across the table sits Joe Scarborough, confident is about to deliver the final moral takedown. You can almost see the moment when he thinks, this is it, I've got him. But then the conversation takes that familiar turn, the awkward kind, where you realize it's no longer arguing with a real person in front of him. He's arguing with a version of Bill Maher he created in his own head, the villain edit. You've seen this before. It's that moment when a debate stops being about what someone actually said and turns into a fight against what it's easier to accuse them of saying. And if you're into these kinds of media clashes and the strange psychology behind them, you already know where this is going. Because this one gets messy in a very revealing way. At the center of the blow-up is a point that's actually pretty simple. Maher wasn't saying Ilhan Omar shouldn't be allowed to criticize America. Not even close. His argument was about perspective. That's it. He was saying, if you're going to criticize a country, fine. This is literally a place where you can criticize a country openly without disappearing or losing your basic freedoms. But maybe acknowledge the difference between America has serious problems and America is uniquely evil and nothing good has ever happened here. That's the whole argument. No ban on speech. No purity test. No claim that immigrants don't get a voice. Just a call for some balance, some context, some awareness that living in a country where public criticism is protected actually matters. But Scarborough hears something else entirely. He immediately reframes it as, how dare you say immigrants can't complain? She's just as American as you are. And yes, she absolutely is. No serious person is denying that. But that wasn't Maher's point. And this is where Maher starts getting visibly frustrated, because he can feel the conversation slipping into one of cable news' favorite tricks. It's the move where you replace someone's actual argument with a more extreme, uglier version of it. Then you dramatically defeat that version and declare victory. It's not a discussion anymore. It's theater. And Maher knows the playbook. He's watched it happen for decades. This is where the word perspective becomes a flashpoint. On the surface, it sounds harmless. Reasonable, even, but it's one of those words that means very different things depending on who's hearing it. For one side, perspective means realism. It means acknowledging scale and comparison. It means recognizing that while America is deeply flawed, it's not the same as living under a failed state, an authoritarian regime, or a place where dissent gets you jailed or killed. For the other side, perspective gets translated into something much darker. It becomes, be quiet, be grateful, sit down, know your place. Whether that translation is honest or just convenient doesn't really matter, because once that interpretation takes hold, the fight is inevitable. Maher's framing is straightforward, even if it makes people uncomfortable. If you came from a place that is objectively more unstable, more chaotic, or more dangerous, Somalia was the example that came up, then it's strange to talk about America as if it's uniquely horrible without acknowledging that contrast. Not to excuse America's problems, not to deny criticism, but to keep the criticism grounded in reality instead of turning it into a blanket condemnation. And that's where everything blows up. Not because the idea is radical, but because nuance doesn't survive well on cable news. Perspective sounds reasonable until it collides with a culture that treats disagreement as a moral attack. And once that happens, nobody's listening anymore. They're just fighting the version of the argument that makes them feel most justified.
Now, he said something terrible among his things he said about Ilhan Omar, and I'm not going to have the quote in front of me, but basically what it was is she comes here and all she does is complain. And Okay, there is something, there is a kernel of truth in that somebody comes from a country like Somalia, and then it just seems like she does not have any perspective on the country that she joined here, and never seems to have anything good to say.
We don't think that way
about America.
The second she came here,
she's allowed.
My family's probably been here for 400 years. The day she came to America and raised her hand and took the oath, she's every bit as much of an American as you are, or me.
And I would say this of every other American. Have some perspective.
She has just as much right as
Donald Trump or any of the
Absolutely.
billionaires
I'm not saying
his administration.
We're not talking about Joe. I'm not saying she didn't have any right. I'm saying have some perspective about this country versus a country like Somalia.
Scarborough fires back with, but she has rights. And Maher immediately responds, I never said she didn't. Then Scarborough doubles down. Well, it sounds like you did. And Maher's basically like, no, that's you doing the thing. And that's when we get the line that pretty much explains half of modern political debate in one sentence. Stop putting words in my mouth. Because let's be honest, how many arguments today follow that exact pattern? Someone says, I think we should have secure borders. And the reply is, oh, so you hate immigrants. Someone says, I think policing needs reform. And suddenly it's, so you want chaos and no laws. Someone says, maybe kids shouldn't be rushed into life-altering medical decisions. And they are instantly turned into a cartoon villain, lurking in a basement, plotting harm. It's the same move every time. A nuanced point gets stripped of all context. It's flattened into the most extreme, ugly interpretation possible. Then that interpretation is treated like a confession you just made out loud. You're no longer arguing about ideas. You're defending yourself against a character someone else invented. And once that happens, the conversation is basically over. That's what Maher's pushing back against in that moment. Not just Scarborough, but the entire habit we developed as a culture. Instead of listening to what someone actually said, we jump straight to what we think they must mean. Intent gets ignored. Clarification doesn't matter. Tone policing replaces understanding. And the loudest accusation wins. This is why so many discussions in America feel impossible now. You're not debating policies or values anymore. You're battling accusations. Every statement is treated like a loyalty test. Every disagreement is framed as a moral failure. And once you're labeled, that's it. No amount of explanation will save you, because people aren't responding to your words anymore. They're responding to the version of you they've already decided to be angry at. That's why Stop Putting Words in My Mouth hits so hard. It's not defensive, it's diagnostic. It describes exactly how nuance dies. Not because people are incapable of understanding it, but because outrage is easier, simpler, more rewarding. And in a media environment built on conflict, the worst possible interpretation isn't a bug, it's a feature.
Just America?
I didn't say that. You're saying that.
No, I'm trying to figure out what you're saying.
What I'm saying is have some perspective about this country, not just her, but yes, I mean, if she's from a country like Somalia, which is a country you wouldn't live in. Right.
There.
Okay. Well, just be honest about it. Instead of, it just seems like it's always completely negative about this country. It also sometimes seems like we have...
I agree. Say something positive.
But say something
say how
realistic
thankful you are to be here.
About...
Yes, I agree with that.
Well, I could say
everyone has free speech, and all of us can complain, but be grateful.
Scarborough then tries to widen the argument by saying, Republicans complain too. Trump says the American dream is dead. And you can see what he's aiming for. He's trying to make it a consistency check. If you're upset about Ilhan Omar criticizing the country, then you should be just as upset when people on the right do it. And honestly, that's a fair point in theory. If the rule is don't trash the country, then it should apply across the board. But Maher's response, at least the way the clip presents it, comes across as dismissive, like Republicans don't really do that. And yes, that part is annoying. In reality, they absolutely do complain, sometimes loudly and dramatically. Maher even clarifies that his call for perspective isn't partisan. He says he'd tell anyone to have perspective, including Republicans. Scarborough actually agrees with that. And yet, the argument keeps escalating. That's because, at that point, the conversation isn't really about the substance anymore. It's about performance. And that's the part a lot of people miss. Many of these so-called debates aren't debates at all. They are emotional status contests. It's about who gets to claim the moral high ground in the moment, who gets to play the role of defender of justice, who gets cast as a villain. Once you enter that mode, everything changes. The goal stops being understanding and starts being winning. And in that mindset, admitting you misunderstood someone doesn't feel like growth. It feels like defeat. It feels like surrender. It feels like taking off your team jersey in front of a national audience. So instead of backing down, people double down. That's why the accusation of a straw man, putting words in someone's mouth, hits so hard. Because once you built your argument around a distorted version of what the other person said, admitting that distortion would mean the whole performance collapses. And for people caught in that moment, protecting the performance matters more than getting the point right.
I can say the same thing about Republicans over the past decade. All they've done is and moaned about how horrible this country was when we're the most powerful country on the planet. We have the most powerful military.
That's when they're out of power.
No, but here's the thing.
As soon as they take office, we're the perfect country.
But when they're out of power, what do? Donald Trump talks about how the American dream is dead. No, it's not. The American dream's not dead. We're stronger militarily. We're stronger economically. We're stronger culturally. We're stronger with soft power. We're stronger in every single way.
I don't know about that.
Maher keeps calling it out, half joking but dead serious at the same time. He's basically saying, you're not arguing with me. You're arguing with Strawman. Strawman didn't even show up tonight, Joe. It's funny, sure, but it also cuts right to the heart of what's broken in modern politics. Strawmanning is the ultimate cheat code. You don't have to wrestle with a real, complicated argument if you can swap it out for a weaker, uglier version. Once you do that, the rest is easy. You knock it down, get your applause, maybe clip it for social media, and everyone on your side feels like you won. The problem is, none of that actually persuades anyone. It doesn't clear anything up. It just raises the emotional temperature until the whole conversation turns into chaos. It's like a family dinner where someone casually mentions the economy, and suddenly voices are raised, old grudges come out, and someone's on the verge of tears. Nothing gets resolved, but everyone leaves feeling worse. Ironically, the most grounded moment in the entire exchange comes when Scarborough shifts to talking about the economy and younger generations. He brings up how the American dream feels harder to reach now. The dollar doesn't stretch as far. Gen Z looks around and doesn't see a realistic path to owning a home. And honestly, that part isn't crazy at all. It's probably the most relatable thing said in the whole discussion. Of course, younger people are frustrated. When rent eats up half your paycheck, groceries feel outrageous, and a starter home costs more than your future earnings, being told to just be grateful doesn't land well. This is where the idea of perspective gets complicated. Yes, it's true that America offers freedoms and opportunities that are rare in both history and the world today. That matters. But it's also true that for a lot of people, the ladder feels taller than it used to. It feels like the first rung is missing. So when someone says, have some perspective, what many people hear is, stop complaining. And their immediate reaction is, easy for you to say, you bought a house when groceries were cheap and tuition didn't come with lifelong debt. So the real question becomes, can both things be true at the same time? Can America be a country worth appreciating while also being a country that desperately needs fixing? Can you recognize the privilege of living here and still say, this system is squeezing people, and something's wrong? If the answer is yes, and it probably is, then the fight isn't really about facts. It's about tone, emphasis, and intent. Maher's arguing for something like cultural etiquette. Criticize a country. Absolutely. But don't talk like you're living in a dystopian prison camp when you're not. Scarborough is arguing from a principle. Once you're American, you get to speak like an American, no qualifiers, no footnotes. And the truth is, those positions don't actually cancel each other out. They only become enemies when we turn them into weapons. Think about it in everyday terms. You've probably met someone who has a pretty decent life, but you'd never know it because every sentence out of their mouth is a complaint. Nothing is ever okay. Nothing is ever enough. Everything feels like a disaster. Then you meet someone who's lived through real chaos, real hardship, and somehow they still manage to be grateful without pretending everything is perfect. They can hold appreciation and criticism at the same time. That's a balance everyone claims to want, but almost no one is willing to practice once the argument turns tribal.
I don't see
Okay, so now you're
I'm just saying, Gen Z.
now you're talking badly about America. How dare you do that? I think it's a great country.
No, I said ask Gen Z.
Well, would Gen Z rather live in America or Somalia?
I'm just saying the American dream is harder to realize. The value of the dollar has gone down so much.
I know.
They don't see the ability to ever own a home, possibly.
Right.
It's a much bigger hill to climb than it was for all of us.
And that's your right to say. As an American. No one's saying it's not. You're
trying to turn this into a argument that doesn't exist.
I'm not trying to turn it into a argument. It is a argument.
No, it isn't.
You're basically saying if you're from Somalia, you can't about what's wrong with America.
But I didn't say you can't. Strawman didn't come to the show, Joe. Strawman. No, I didn't say that either.
Okay.
Jesus, it's like having a fight with your wife, which I don't even have.
That contrast is exactly what Maher is pointing at. And you don't have to agree with him about Ilhan Omar specifically to understand the big idea. Because gratitude isn't the same thing as silence. Acknowledging what works doesn't mean ignoring what's broken. It just means starting from a place that isn't pure contempt. Gratitude is a posture. It's a baseline recognition that some things function, even while others clearly don't. When public figures speak as if nothing has any value at all, when it's non-stop condemnation with no balance, people react. Not because they want censorship, and not because they can't handle criticism, but because it feels off. It feels unbalanced. It starts to feel less like a push for reform and more like a performance. Like the goal isn't improvement, but identity building, branding. And that's a deeper problem. So much modern commentary runs on branding. Outrage has become a currency. Negativity is the fastest way to attention. If someone says, here are a few things this country does well, and here are several things we should seriously fix, the response is usually polite and quiet. But if someone says, everything is corrupt, everything is evil, tear it all down, suddenly the algorithm lights up. Retweets roll in. Podcast invitations follow. Applause pours out from people who treat maximal outrage like it's a brave act of truth-telling. The incentives are completely backwards. The clip also veers into a strange side story involving Don Lemon and claims about disrupting a church service, with someone invoking the Face Act. That part gets messy fast, and it's worth being careful because online stories have a habit of mutating as they spread. But the broader point pulled from that moment is still valid. Rules and accountability should apply to everyone, not just the people you disagree with. If you believe in free speech, you also have to believe in boundaries. If you believe in protest, you have to accept that there are lines you don't cross, especially in sacred spaces or private events. And if you claim to believe in law and order, you don't get to support it only when your opponents are the ones facing consequences. Principles don't mean much if they only apply when they're convenient. That's really what this whole argument circles back to. Perspective doesn't mean silence. Gratitude doesn't mean denial. And criticism doesn't require burning everything down to prove you're serious. But when outrage becomes a default and balance disappears, people stop hearing the message and start questioning the motive.
They arrested Don Lemon? Somebody went, yes, like good. I don't know. I
didn't hear that.
It's not good to arrest him. I don't,
Well, I'm going to say he violated the Face Act. He went into a church, disrupted their worship, and then later in an interview compared them to white supremacists. That's not journalism. That's activism. I had an experience with Don Lemon.
And that's why this whole back and forth about Omar, Trump, and the idea the American dream keeps looping to the same core issue, fairness and consistency. The real question isn't who you like more or which side you're on. It's whether you're willing to hold your own side to the same standards you demand from the other one. Or are you just looking for ammunition to score points? Because once it turns into a hunt for gotcha moments, the conversation stops being about values and starts being about winning. Scarborough's biggest problem in this exchange isn't that he disagrees with Maher. Disagreement is normal. That's fine. The issue is how he tries to win the argument. Instead of responding to what Maher is actually saying, he reframes it into something harsher and easier to attack. He keeps nudging Maher's point into a more extreme version, as if that version is what was said all along. That's a classic move in arguments, especially on TV, where pressure is high and nuance doesn't always survive. Maher, to his credit, doesn't let that slide. He keeps pulling the conversation back to the original point. Over and over, it's the same correction. That's not what I said. You're doing it again. He's not changing his argument, and is not escalating it. He's just insisting on accuracy. Scarborough keeps pushing back, insisting he isn't misrepresenting anything, even as the gap between what was said and what's being argued gets wider. And then Maher lands on the line that feels painfully familiar to anyone who's ever been in a heated argument, especially one where words are being twisted. He says a thing people think but rarely get to say out loud in the moment. I could show the tape. That line isn't just about proof. It's about frustration. It's the point where someone realizes a disagreement isn't about ideas anymore, but about refusing to acknowledge what was actually said. And once you reach that stage, the argument stops moving forward, no matter how loud it gets.
I said have some perspective.
Have some perspective.
So
That's it.
I
And I
agree.
would say it to anybody.
That's
So
right.
if you're
Have
from
some
everybody.
I would say that to the Republican Party that says the American
I
dream
would
is dead.
too.
Good for
Of
you.
course.
We agree about this. So why are you yelling?
Because
because I don't like when people put words in my mouth. That's why.
I did not do that.
you did it over and over again. I could show the tape.
Show me the tape. Show it to me.
Yeah, that's a heartbreak of it. That moment is perfect, and not in a feel-good way. In a this is exactly where we are as a culture way. You're right. The tape exists now. Everything exists. Multiple angles, timestamps, transcripts, and HD audio. And somehow we're still arguing like it's 1993 and someone forgot to hit record. People will look straight at evidence and say, no, that's not what happened. Not because they're confused, but because admitting reality would cost them status. In a world where perception is power, being wrong isn't just a mistake. It's a threat. And that's why the pivot happens instead of the apology. I'm sorry. I'm misunderstood doesn't play well in a system built on dominance and certainty. The incentives are brutal. If you admit error, you don't get points for growth. You get clipped, mocked, and framed as weak. So instead of saying, I hear you, people change the subject, escalate the tone, or moralize a disagreement. Anything but concede ground. That's why Scarborough's story about Maher defending him lands so strangely. It's almost jarring. For a second, the TV armor comes off, and you see an actual relationship, a shared history, and a human memory that doesn't fit neatly into the current fight. It's him saying, in the only way the format allows, I'm not just this character you're reacting to. And is right. People are always more complicated than their worst clip. But your question is a real one. Why does it take a blow-up to get there? Why does it require heat, humiliation, and a viral moment before someone reaches a basic humility? Because our culture has quietly rebranded humility as weakness. We treat I was wrong like a confession of guilt instead of what it actually is, evidence of thinking. We've turned conversation into combat, and in combat, surrender, even partial surrender, is unforgivable. You're supposed to hold the line, even if the line makes no sense anymore. What's ironic is that the move everyone fears, admitting misunderstanding, is often the move that would actually earn respect from people outside your bubble. Most adults don't expect perfection. They expect honesty. They expect good faith. They expect someone to say, okay, I hear what you meant now. That's not humiliation. That's maturity. But maturity doesn't trend. It doesn't generate outrage clicks. It doesn't rally the tribe. So we end up with this weird reality where everyone says they want real conversations, but the system punishes the very behaviors that make real conversations possible. And the tape just sits there, quietly confirming what was said, while people argue past it like it's irrelevant, which might be the most unsettling part of all. It's not that we lack evidence. It's that we lack the cultural permission to change our minds.
Knocking them down and setting next year knocking them down. I wanted to tell everybody here, as you're talking about dealing with people who think differently than you, I was telling Marjorie the story about when we first met. And I'd love, since they saw that last little thing that I did, I'd love to just say for those, everybody here probably doesn't know it, but I was here, 90, maybe 96,
Oh,
97.
yeah, absolutely. Well,
and
the old show.
The old
Politically
show.
incorrect,
Politically
yeah.
incorrect.
Exactly. That's a quiet tragedy of it. How close they were to a real conversation, and how little it would have cost to get there. All it would have taken was that one sentence. Okay, I hear you. Not surrender, not endorsement, just acknowledgement. And suddenly the whole terrain changes. Now you're not fighting over what someone meant. You're actually debating what makes sense. That's where the interesting stuff lies. Because those questions you listed, those are the grown-up questions. What does balanced criticism actually look like in practice? Is gratitude something you feel or something you're expected to perform? Where's the line between loving a country and mythologizing it? How do you talk about structural problems without sounding like you want the whole thing torched for sport? Those are hard questions, but they're productive ones. And none of them require silencing anyone. They require curiosity. They require a little humility. They require the assumption that the person across from you might be acting in good faith, even if you still end up disagreeing. What kills that possibility is exactly what you named, the reflex to assume the worst interpretation. Once disagreement becomes a moral offense, the conversation is already dead. At that point, you're not exchanging ideas, you're filing charges. And every sentence gets read like evidence in a trial instead of a thought in progress. That's why honesty is the right word here. Not honesty as in brutal truth-telling, but honesty as in accurate listening. Hearing what was actually said, not what scores points with your side if you exaggerate it. It's a low bar, and somehow we keep tripping over it. And the wild thing is most people already know how to do this. They do it in real life all the time. With friends, with co-workers, with family members they don't completely agree with but still want to have dinner with. Public discourse didn't forget how to have adult conversations. We just built incentives that reward acting like an asshole instead. If these conversations were treated less like gladiator matches and more like workshops, messy, imperfect, but honest, we'd still disagree just as much. But we'd come out clearer, less angry, less cynical, and maybe even a little smarter, which is probably why that version doesn't make TV.
You know, I was from the South, I was conservative, I was a Southern Baptist, and somebody on your show called me a racist and a bigot. And of course, at that time, 99.9% of your audience was really left-wing. There would always be one guy with a NASCAR shirt that would be the one guy that cheered for me. But you stood up for me, and I've never forgotten it. And you said, hold on a second. The only bigot I see here is, and you pointed to the comedian who was trying to get a cheap laugh. I mean, and I've never forgotten that 35 years later.
Yes, that's a pressure point right there. And you nail why everyone feels so fried all the time. The strawman move doesn't just derail one argument. It rewires behavior. If every careful sentence gets reinterpreted as something monstrous, people learn the lesson fast. Don't speak carefully. Careful gets punished. Nuance gets you dragged. So you switch modes. You simplify. You harden. You talk like you're already bracing for an attack. And once everyone does that, the whole ecosystem starts sounding like competing press releases instead of human thought. That's how polarization becomes self-reinforcing. Not because people suddenly became dumber, but because the cost of being precise got too high. And this is where your should vs can distinction is doing a lot of work. Scarborough is right on a rights level. In a liberal democracy, once you're American, you can speak however you want. You don't need to pass a gratitude test. You don't owe anyone reverence. Tone is not a legal requirement. And it shouldn't be. Maher is talking about something else entirely. He is talking about the social, cultural, persuasive dimension. Not are you allowed to say this, but is this the most credible, effective, grounded way to say it? That's not censorship. That's etiquette, strategy, persuasion. It's a difference between having a microphone and using it well. The meltdown happens when people collapse those two categories on purpose. They hear you should have perspective and translate it into you're not allowed to speak. They hear tone matters and translate it into sit down and shut up. And once that translation happens, the conversation is over, because now you're not debating norms anymore. You're defending rights against an accusation no one actually made. What makes this especially corrosive is that both sides are correct within their own lane. Rights protect your ability to speak. Perspective shapes whether people take you seriously. But acknowledging that requires admitting the other person is talking about a different layer of the problem. And in a status-obsessed media environment, admitting that feels like giving ground. So instead, we get the permanent argument loop. People should be more balanced. So you want to silence them? No, I want them to be persuasive. So you want forced patriotism? No, I want comparative reality. So you hate free speech? Round and round, until everyone's too tired to care. And that exhaustion you mentioned? That's not apathy. It's burnout from watching the same misunderstanding get reenacted over and over by people who absolutely should know better. Because deep down, most people already understand this intuitively. You can complain nonstop, but if you never acknowledge what's working, people stop trusting your judgment. That's not oppression. That's human psychology. The tragedy isn't that we disagree about America. We always have. It's that we've lost the ability to say, we're arguing about different things, and that's okay. And until we relearn that, everyone's going to keep shouting, and nobody's going to feel heard.
Trump announced he was moving a huge armada to the Middle East. And he also said we have something called a discombobulator.
Yeah, I've heard about that. I think the people in Venezuela found out about that as well.
The discombobulator?
Apparently they did.
Yeah. What is a discombobulator?
Well, I don't know. But we have one.
Yeah. This is exactly where the argument actually lives, and I think you framed it cleanly without slipping into team sports nonsense. Here's where I land. Having perspective is a fair expectation for public figures if their stated goal is persuasion, coalition building, or reform. It's not a moral requirement. It's a practical one. Perspective isn't shut up and be grateful. It's a signal that you understand the full picture so people trust you when you criticize the broken parts. That's not obedience. That's credibility. Where it turns into shut up and be grateful is when perspective is demanded selectively or only from people we already disagree with. That's when it becomes a weapon instead of a habit. And that's the hypocrisy Scarborough accidentally points at but doesn't quite land. Both sides absolutely do this. The right trash America nonstop when Democrats are in charge. The left trash America nonstop when Republicans are in charge. Then, like clockwork, the country magically becomes either a shining city or an irredeemable hellscape depending on who won the last election. That's not patriotism. That's mood ring nationalism. As for what's more annoying, honestly, the inconsistency. The same people who say America is fundamentally evil one year will say our institutions are sacred the next. Same script, different jerseys. People aren't stupid. They notice. Now, the Gen Z angle matters more than a lot of pundits want to admit. When older generations say the American dream is alive, a lot of younger people don't hear inspiration. They hear gaslighting math. Not because America has no opportunities, but because the inputs changed. Housing, healthcare, education, debt. Those numbers don't care about nostalgia. So when someone says, just work hard, it can feel like being told the stove isn't hot while your skin is blistering. That doesn't mean Gen Z is wrong or that older generations are lying. It means they are talking from different economic realities, and instead of acknowledging that gap, we turn it into a moral argument about gratitude versus entitlement. That's lazy, and it guarantees nobody listens. And this loops back to your core insight. Are you trying to fix things, or are you trying to be applauded for being morally correct? Because real reform is boring. It's slow. It requires acknowledging trade-offs. It requires admitting when your side screws up. It requires saying this country does some things well and badly in the same sentence, something social media actively punishes. Performance, on the other hand, is rewarded instantly. Outrage scales. Nuance doesn't. That's why the Maher versus Scarborough moment sticks. Not because one guy won, but because it exposed how often we argue against avatars instead of people. How rarely someone says, okay, I see what you're saying, even if I disagree. How perspective itself has become tribal. So no, perspective shouldn't be a partisan weapon. It should be a basic hygiene practice for criticism. Criticize America hard. Demand better. Push reform. Just don't pretend you're doing it from a gulag. And defend free speech fiercely. Just don't pretend every request for balance is censorship. If we could downgrade half our argument from moral emergencies to actual conversations, the temperature would drop overnight, and progress might actually start happening. And yeah, this comment section would be fun.